Hello, viewers or viewer, as the case may be. Hi, it's been a while, and for the kind of thing I'm trying to do, a movie news show slash podcast slash series, whatever you want to call it, uh, that's not advisable. Not because uh, I'm getting myself into some kind of regularity thing where I keep putting out videos so that people know when to expect them and I can build an audience or anything like that. I don't have those kinds of goals right now, but just because if I spend this long between videos, a lot happens in between, and that just means I have more that I will have to talk about at once. So yeah, what I have decided to do today, instead of trying to cram everything in, is I have severely shortlisted topics. I have removed a lot of things that I thought were kind of interesting and I had thoughts on that I could talk about, but there's just not enough time in the world. Well, not anymore anyway. So I am going to just go through a few of the things that have happened in the last week and a half, quarter to 2 weeks, whatever ish time has gone by since my last video. And then, as usual, I will talk a little bit about what I've been watching in this period. Obviously, just as there has been more news, I have also been watching a lot more stuff because more time passed by. So, the first thing I want to touch on is the Jamie Foxx situation. You might have heard of this. You might have noticed that in the last couple of weeks, a lot of cases have been filed, which are allegations of, well, allegation is I guess, something that a word that we use even if it's not a legal situation. So I guess I could be more specific and say just cases of sexual abuse slash sexual assault. Those cases have been filed a lot in the US in the last few weeks. And the reason for that basically is that in New York, there was like a 1 year period for which they removed the statute of limitations, suspended it temporarily, uh, and people could therefore uh, bring cases to court for incidents that had happened many years ago. And that period just ended a few days ago. And so, in anticipation of that ending, a lot of people who must have been considering for a while to go public with what happened to them have now filed their cases. And the highest profile case in that list was Jamie Foxx. He's been accused of sexual assault, an incident that apparently happened in 2015. And I will not get into the details of what happened. No point bringing up the potentially traumatic stuff, but if you are interested, you can find them. There is a pretty detailed account online of exactly what happened. And yeah, that case is in court now, and it's just I don't have that much to say about it beyond just the depressing reminder that uh, Hollywood, among other major film industries, is a place where uh, sexual abuse, sexual misconduct is really common. And unfortunately, people who hold power, people who have fame and influence, are usually able to keep getting away with it, which just encourages more such actions. I mean, the Jonathan Majors case is still going on. I think it just recently started, and we just keep hearing so many of these uh, incidents so frequently that it sort of desensitizes you, right, to the incident. I mean, I'm sure not everyone gets desensitized by these things. I'm sure there are people you whose rage just keeps getting fueled more and more. And yeah, I guess make sure that that's what happens instead of getting numb to these instances, because no matter how much it happens each time, there are human beings involved whose lives, whose emotions, whose just existence in this world depends on how society as a whole responds to whatever has happened, whatever has been brought up. So yeah, it sucks that the statute of limitations is going back up. It's kind of a problematic rule because there are so many reasons that people are not able to come forward with what happened to them when it happens, and saying that a few years later they shouldn't be able to come forward with it at all. Uh, that's messed up. But I'm glad that at least there was this one period where people were able to share their stories and seek justice, or start seeking justice. Of course, the procedure will continue. So, yeah, uh, that is that. I will move on to something a little less dire. Well, at least a little less dire in the sense of direct human cost, but it is still a pretty dire situation in the world of cinema, and that is the mess that has been going on at Warner Brothers Discovery. We have talked before about how under David Zaslav's reign, they are constantly removing uh, projects, canceling completed projects, and just gutting uh, this company down from a storytelling company to just sort of a tech company which happens to involve stories. And the latest that happened in that, I say latest in quotes because, of course, it happened more than a week ago. Uh, Wait, actually, no, this one happened less than a week ago. This just happened a couple of days ago. So yeah, I'm not too late on this particular story. But yeah, the latest in the saga of Warner Brothers Discovery and David Zaslav sucking the life out of art was what happened with Looney Tunes. Now, initially, the announcement that came out seemed a lot worse than what it turned out to be. Initially, it seemed like they are removing all Looney Tunes shorts from Max, uh, which would have been so idiotic. That is, the Looney Tunes are such a core part of the identity of Warner Brothers. It is such a crucial part of film history. And that would just have been them shooting themselves in the foot and really declaring that nothing matters to them beyond the bottom line. Though in the long run, you know what? It won't even help their bottom line. I don't see how you keep a service running if you keep damaging its reputation this much. Then, of course, a day later, it turned out that that wasn't exactly what was happening. There was some error because of which it seemed that way. Or maybe they're just saying it was an error, but maybe what happened was that because of the backlash, they immediately took back the decision. We don't know. We will never know, I assume. But the way the story was covered was, hey guys, relax, it's not so bad, none of this is happening. But I think the focus should still be on our new understanding of what is happening, because just because all the shots aren't going doesn't mean nothing is going. uh, there is one title from the Looney Tunes family, which is the 2003 movie Looney Tunes Back in Action, and by the end of the year that is leaving Max. It's a movie, a live action animation hybrid that starred Brendan Fraser, Steve Martin, and Timothy Dalton, and of course, a lot of the animated classic Looney Tunes characters. And even just that being removed from the service is still a smaller sign, but a sign that Warner Brothers has lost touch with what made their work special, what defined them, the stories they told. Because regardless of whether you think this particular movie has much significant historical value or not, it is still part of a legacy that is at the core of Warner Brothers. So, if you were talking about Disney, for instance, and they removed like one of their core Walt Disney Animation Studios animated features, even if that particular movie was not very significant, it would be a huge WTF moment because that series is just at the core of Disney's identity over the years. So, yeah, this depressing saga continues, and in the same vein, I will now shift gears to actually talking about Disney and them gutting their own core identity because while it's not the exact same situation, what is happening with them is also pretty stupid. Now, of course, about a year ago, uh, their interim CEO, not interim, but their CEO for like 3 or 4 years, Bob Chapek, was removed and replaced by their earlier CEO, Bob Iger. And I saw some people online celebrating that as if, I mean, I get it. You hate Bob Chapek. He was a terrible CEO. He was very anti art himself, not as destructive as maybe like a David Zaslav, but still very anti art. But people were talking about it as if, oh, Bob Iger is so great. Disney was so great under his reign, and it's so nice to see him back. People have short memories, guys. It was not all great under Bob Iger. First of all, he picked Bob Chapek. Secondly, before Chapek became CEO, he was running Disney parks under Bob Iger. And I think most people agreed that that was, in that era, the worst run department of Disney. It kept coming up in the political sphere in the worst lights. It was just a whole department that was horrid to its employees. I mean, not that it isn't today, but just talking about what the situation of with Bob Chapek's leadership was, and it had continuously gotten a worse and worse experience for uh, the people who went to the parks to enjoy them. So at that time, when among all of Disney's divisions, Bob Chapek was making a name for himself for terrible leadership, Bob Iger, first of all, let all that happen under him, under his own leadership. So, the blame keeps going to the top. So you can't just say that it was Chapek's fault that Parks was suffering so much. Iger was at fault as well. And moreover, Iger then picked Chapek based on what he had done in that tenure to replace him as CEO. So that shows terrible leadership. But even if you just look inside the film realm, Bob Iger's whole era, people like to talk about how all these problems that are happening with Disney are Chapek era problems, but almost none of them are. Whether you look at Lucasfilm, who have recently had a problem with Indiana Jones, a problem with Willow, a problem with a lot of their Star Wars stuff, but Star Wars had already started going bad and being handled poorly, being run poorly before Chapek ever stepped in. If you'll remember the whole Solo debacle and the whole uh, the rise of Skywalker stuff and the way that whole trilogy was mishandled, that happened under Bob Iger's reign. Then you look at something like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Uh, the quality has been pretty rough in Phase 5, and they have been making too much. But this push towards making more and more stuff and this decline in quality did not start just now. It had started in the final years of Bob Iger as CEO. In 2019, we were already seeing a dip in the general quality of the MCU. I would even argue in late 2018, we started seeing that. So that is another sign that things were already rough. The Disney remakes did not just get rough now. They were never. It was never such a good idea to focus so much on them and to make Disney's live action department almost exclusively dedicated to remakes of their animated stuff. Uh, but Iger did that, and also the quality had started suffering pretty much after The Jungle Book, and you had movies like Dumbo, the Dumbo remake, coming out also under Iger's era. The Lion King remake came out under Iger's era. So this assault on creativity, this bad leadership, this bad management of Disney movies has been going on since under Bob Iger's leadership. A lot of people talk about how much Disney started focusing on Disney Plus as opposed to the movie side of things. And yes, Bob Chapek did do that. But before he ever stepped in, Bob Iger had announced his intention to do the same. He said that we are starting Disney Plus, and once we do that, we will primarily be a Disney Plus focused company. So, uh, that was a long rant, but it was all preamble to say that Bob Iger's return is does not bode well for Disney in any way. Maybe sure his leadership won't be as disastrous as Bob Chapek's was, but it's not going to lead to some kind of renaissance of great film and television. You might have noticed how uh, Pixar and Disney animation, the quality of those movies has been suffering for a number of years. Pixar pretty much lost a lot of its magic in the early 2010s. So those are also divisions that Bob Iger is clearly not the best choice to lead. I mean, not that he's leading those divisions individually, but he's overseeing all of it. So the latest development that I was building towards in this long winded way is that in a recent, uh, I don't know, was it interview or a talk, kind of panel, something of that sort, he has talked about how messaging or message based storytelling has apparently been a problem of Disney movies in recent years, and he's going to start to move away from that. The exact quote here that I'm looking at in front of me is creators lost sight of what their number one objective needed to be. We have to entertain first. It's not about messages. And this is a disturbing thing to hear from generally just about any studio head or head of a company which has a movie studio in it, but especially disturbing to hear from Disney. And I mean, the reasons should be clear. Just in general, with art, uh, it should not be a studio head, an executive directing from above that uh, the primary purpose of uh, the films that these artists are making needs to be entertainment. Artists should get to decide what the purpose of their art is. Some artists do want to primarily entertain and then maybe also have messages in their movies, maybe also do other things with their films. And other artists should be able to decide that, you know what, entertainment uh, is maybe a part of the movie but secondary, and their primary goal with their art is to deliver a message in the kind of powerful way that only film can, maybe. That is what a movie company should be about. It should be about empowering artists to do what they want to be able to do with their art, to be able to express themselves, to be able to make great art in their own way, and not what Bob Iger seems to be saying that he wants to do, which is to enforce a directive from up above that the primary purpose of your art needs to be entertainment and everything else that you want to do has to be secondary. And this is especially disturbing in this current era when some Disney movies have been getting criticisms for being too woke, despite not really doing all that much to be progressive. Like, it's not like Disney is making these politically radical films or anything. Just the existence of, let's say, a queer person or a person of color in a Disney movie is usually enough to set off these internet trolls who then start calling Disney movies woke, right? And then you consider the history of Disney movies. In a lot of their defining movies, the films that have made them what they are, the message was right at the center of the story. It was just as important as the entertainment, if not more. All the classic fairy tales they have adapted have had a central message. You know, Beauty and the Beast has this message about looking beyond people's looks. The Lion King has its own conservative propaganda message about, you know, following the purpose you were born for, and uh, not trusting immigrants, and all of those kinds of things. And Aladdin has a message about being yourself and not trying to be something you're not, and about honesty and all those kinds of things. And all of these movies had that core to them. That's one of the things that has defined fairy tale storytelling forever. Well, I don't know about forever, but for as far back as I know of the history of fairy tale storytelling, right? And the same thing continues when you look at Disney's other major animation acquisition, which is Pixar. Finding Nemo had a message about parenting. The Incredibles had a message about how to handle a midlife crisis. Inside Out had a message about how to deal with your sadness. And Toy Story had a message about handling jealousy. And if now, coming under this right wing pressure, well, I say pressure with this kind of grace that I'm giving Bob Iger, that, you know, maybe he himself does not want to do this and he's just doing this under pressure. But who knows, maybe Iger himself wants to do this as well. If by coming under this pressure, Iger now starts to dictate that Disney movies have to go away from this, he is also losing touch with what Disney is supposed to have been, what made Disney so beloved. At least a key part of what made Disney films so beloved, and that is a part of the risk that we're facing in this current era, when tech CEOs, tech billionaires are running movie studios, and instead of running them as companies that make art and that try to make money so that they can use that money to create more art, they run them as they would run a tech company. The art just becomes a product that's fueling their bottom lines. And so they no longer care about any sort of company values that they may stand for. And that is, I think, a big part of the risk that Disney is facing today. So, uh, I'll take a break from all the depressing, the world is ending stories with a bit of a positive story. I really don't have much to say about this, so this will be over in 30 seconds or a minute. But Ardman Entertainment, reports came out about their work, that not about their work, but about their situation, which said that once their once this new Chicken Run film is done, for which like all of this clay that they've used, once that clay is done, that uses up the reserves of clay that Ardman has. And so until they're able to get more clay, they will not be able to start working on another movie. And getting more clay is going to be tricky, because apparently which the manufacturer of the clay that Ardman uses has shut down, which is a huge problem, a bigger problem than it might seem at first, because uh, you can't just use any old plasticine for stop motion animation. You need clay which has certain properties which make it work in that medium. One of the interesting things I found out about because of this story was that they need this clay that they use for animation to be very durable under high heat, because the lights that they're using to film their clay-based sets, those lights make the environment really hot, and so you can't have clay that just starts melting off. And so, yeah, that among other properties made it important that they had their very specific clay. But the reason this is a happy piece of news is because just a few days after that, Ardman came out with the very comforting statement where they said that no, they do in fact have a lot more clay reserves that they've all based on which they've already started working on their next project, and they have like they have a plan. They know what they're going to do to start acquiring more clay now that the old manufacturer is shut down. So we don't have to worry about missing out on the work of one of the best stop motion studios that there is right now. So, yay. Okay, so moving on from that, another thing that happened, because so many things happened, uh, was this weird Hollywood Reporter article that came out about Nia DaCosta. Uh, Now, I bring this up because the way Nia DaCosta has been talked about in movie news recently has been really uncomfortable and disconcerting. And the first instance of this happened like a month ago or so, where some reports started, where there was this one report, I think, that came out and talked about how uh, she this was some one of the trades that was talking to their inside sources at Marvel Studios, and the source was telling them that uh, one of the reasons that the Marvels did not work out did not end up being good was because she left in the middle of the post production phase to start working on her next movie. And the stupid thing, the idiotic thing is that within that article itself, there was enough information for any reader slash writer to understand that the project had gone way over schedule, and she is a working director. She has contracts. She is always probably hunting for employment, and so if she had a schedule for when the Marvels will end, when the post production for it will end, and then she would have booked another project with another studio that she would start working on after that date, maybe with some small gap after that date. She can't afford to keep months of her time just free and unemployed just in case something goes wrong. And in this case, something did go wrong. The Marvels did go over schedule, which means that post production was not able to be done by the time she had to start working on her next project. So, of course, she left, and trying to make it sound like the problem is her decision in this scenario was really shady. And now the new piece that came out, it's no longer that new, but the recent piece that came out in the Hollywood Reporter talked about her not attending the premiere of the Marvels because she was at her birthday party, which anyway on its own would not have been such a bad thing. It's her birthday. She should get to decide to attend her own birthday party instead of a movie premiere. But on top of that, uh, in the article, it also said that her representatives are telling them that she was not even informed of when the premiere event is happening, and she only got to know at the party itself. And given all that, the way it was framed was just so messed up. So I am just going to point you to the headline. The headline in the Hollywood Reporter says, "Why Marvel's director Nia DaCosta bailed on the casting crew screening." So, you know, uh, this was not the premiere, my bad. It was the screening for the cast and crew. The cast could not attend because the actors were on strike, and Hollywood Reporter like, why did she bail? And given what it turns out happened, it's just such an awful headline to write. And I think the takeaway from this story should be that we should, first of all, if something seems off, read the article, don't just rely on the headlines. And secondly, why, even though these major trades often have the correct information, their reporting is good in that specific sense. Beyond that, do not trust their reporting, because most of these major trades are at least partially owned by some filmmaking company. So they are they often have an incentive to make their readers more sympathetic towards the positions of the big studios as opposed to their employees. The same thing happened during the strikes. A lot of propaganda was spread around by companies like Deadline and The Wrap, that made the positions of the unions sound weaker, while messaging from the companies was being blown into a loudspeaker by these trades. So yeah, just make sure to always take these with a grain of salt. Okay, the next thing I want to address is a kind of depressing Doctor Who news. So the new episode recently came out, and that was really nice. And it was great to see Tennant and Catherine Tate back. Their chemistry is as good as ever. The episode kept up the values that this show, uh, you know, uh, is all about, that this show stands for. So that was nice to see. There are people who have some issues with how some of the themes were tackled. It fumbled a little bit, but at least it was an honest attempt, and that is good to see. But some behind the scenes news came out about Doctor Who, which is quite disturbing. So we know that in the US, because of the writers' strikes, uh, the Writers Guild was able to negotiate a bit of a residual, not the level of residual that they deserve, but a bit of a residual uh, from the studios. It seems that the UK situation is not so good, because a report came out recently that says that uh, Doctor Who, well, the BBC, in their negotiations with the writers on Doctor Who, have got a new contract now, under which they are not going to get residuals. Instead, they're just going to get a higher upfront pay, which is just not the kind of model that's sustainable. I mean, that's one of the reasons American writers went on strike, because that does not, like, one paycheck at the beginning does not help you keep a career going. You need something more reliable. And apparently Doctor Who writers also, for a while, for decades, have been relying really on a lot of residuals. Doctor Who was apparently a great source of residuals, because people obviously keep watching it and rewatching it and rewatching it, and more people keep joining on the bandwagon. So all these old episodes that have been made and aired are always getting fresh eyes on them, and obviously some of that money that's being made should go to the people who created that stuff, right? So it's really unfortunate that that kind of contract was able to be negotiated, and studios will be able to negotiate these contracts that are not great for employees, if uh, because they have the leverage, and the only thing that can stop something like this from happening is if there are protections in the writers union deals. And so it seems like the Great Britain Writers Guild, or whatever it's called, the Writers Guild of Great Britain, they do not have a deal which could have protected the Doctor Who writers from such a contract. Uh, this is just a report. We don't have anything official on this per se, but a lot of these things are bound by confidentiality. So I don't think we should be holding our breath for that. But it does sound like a pretty distressing situation. And I wonder if the next time the Writers Guild contract in the UK, in Britain, is up for renewal, will they also face the kind of troubles that the US writers did? And are we about to see another writer's strike hitting soon? So, oh, I just saw the news that in about half an hour or an hour, there's going to be a new trailer for Furiosa. Now, I wish I had started the stream a little bit later so that I could uh, talk about what I think of the trailer on the stream. Oh well, maybe we'll talk about it next time, or maybe it will just be such old news that no one will care anymore. I won't care anymore. Who knows? I hope it's good. I really hope it's good. I love Mad Max Fury Road, but George Miller is just such a hit or miss filmmaker. You never know if a new movie from him is going to be amazing or terrible or somewhere in between. Fingers crossed. Anyway, that was a little digression, but it's over now. And I will move on to the next topic. This is actually a really cool thing I saw recently, and I just wanted to shout this out. So there's this new documentary coming out called Four Daughters, and its director, I'm just going to read the name here. I'm sorry if I'm butchering the pronunciation. The name of the director is Kauthar Ben Hania. Uh, and she talked about the way she made this documentary, and I just want to bring this up because I think it's really cool. Now, only know of one piece of work that she's done before. She's made some documentaries, but I haven't seen those. I saw this n- fiction short film that she made before, uh, called, wait, what was the name? I and the Stupid Boy. It's on YouTube. Do look it up. Do watch it. It's really cool. It does some really interesting things with the kind of story it's telling. Like, it's taking the kind of horror that we've been getting a lot of recently, social issue related horror. She does a bit of that in a short film format, that in a really effective way. So I had been interested to see what she does next anyway, and what she has done next is this really cool thing. So what she talked about with regards to Four Daughters was that she does not usually like to film reenactments for documentaries. Now, a lot of times filmmakers feel like they have to do that because you're talking to people and they're telling you what happened, and what ends up happening is that the most fascinating parts of the story don't play out in front of the cameras. They have already maybe played out before the documentarian even got there. So what do? You get people to reenact what happened. And there are filmmakers who don't like that. That kind of thing can make the movie more dynamic but less honest, and honesty is usually one of the things you're aiming for. Authenticity is one of the things you're aiming for when you're making a documentary. So Kautar Ben Hania is one such filmmaker who really does not like that. And for Four Daughters, I read up the premise yourself. It'll take too long to describe it, but it's a really fascinating premise. What she did was she got actors who would film reenactments, but instead of just doing the reenactments and showing those in the documentary, or focusing on those in the documentary, I do think the reenactments are still in there, but they're not the focus. The focus instead is, in preparation of these reenactments, the actors are talking to the people involved, uh, whose lives they're reenacting. And those conversations where the actors are trying to get inside the heads of these people so that they can prepare for the role so that they can figure out how to most accurately reenact whatever is being described as having happened. Those conversations become the focus of the documentary. So what happens is now you've got something more interesting to watch than just a talking heads documentary. Now you've got a conversation that involves something more personal, something more emotional, because these actors aren't just interviewing someone to learn things about them, they are interviewing someone to embody them, and that can get really tricky because people are messy, people are gray, and so actors can also have weird and conflicting feelings about the people they're trying to portray. And that emotional messiness you're able to then explore through these conversations, but for any of it you don't have to lose the authenticity the way you would if you just directly showed the reenactments. You do directly get people interacting with each other and you get to see what that's like. Obviously no solution to these kind of problems can be perfect, but I do think this is a really clever and innovative thing that she has come up with, and it makes me really excited to check out the documentary whenever it becomes available to me. So I will keep a lookout for that. I would recommend you do as well. And yeah, with that, I will come to the final topic that I want to talk about today, and that is something that you have already heard so much about from everywhere, I'm sure, and that is the backlash that Melissa Barrera and Susan Sarandon faced for speaking up for Palestine, speaking against genocide. Uh, Both of them have been very active in recent weeks, in the last month and a half, talking either on social media or in general, like public platforms, about uh, just what's the situation, what's been happening, trying to get the facts out to the public, to their followers. And uh, compared to many other major celebrities, these are two actresses who have been very frank about it. A lot of people have been avoiding the use of words like genocide because it's a bit taboo among Zionists to call a spade a spade. But these two have been more honest about it, and they have said that what's happening is an ethnic cleansing, what's happening is a genocide, and they have pointed out the statistics, the figures, the photos, the accounts, all the different variables, that all the different stories that we need to know, that their followers need to know. And what has happened is that Susan Sarandon's agency that represented her uh, picked out one of her statements that they could that they could paint in an anti-Semitic light, and uh, the company that produces the Scream movies, of which the last two starred Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega, they took one of Melissa Barrera's Instagram stories, I think, from which they could take a line and paint it in an anti-Semitic light, and uh, that's what they ended up running with. So the talent agency has dropped Susan Sarandon, and the Scream production company has fired Melissa Barrera from the starring role in Scream 7 because of what they call anti Semitic statements, which, of course, is a code for anti-genocide statements and or anti-Zionist statements. And if you have even the slightest doubt about this, you might even think that, oh, maybe they're just misguided, but in their hearts they're actually trying to stop anti-Semitism. They just don't realize that these statements aren't anti-Semitic. None of that is happening, because so this has generally been like a Hollywood wide thing. A lot of people have been fired or dropped for saying something in favor of Palestine. And think about where this ire goes, right? Because who is the most well known Hollywood anti Semite? Mel Gibson. And he has been uh, doing movies regularly, even a number of leading roles over like the last decade or so. He also got to direct Hacksaw Ridge, a major motion picture, which itself, like his work on that, got recognized in major awards by the industry. So clearly, the industry sees anti-Semitism right in front of it and does not give a shit. They do not care. Hollywood is not invested in social justice in any sense of speaking. When these big companies preach these values of we don't allow hate speech, we don't work with people who are spreading hate speech, they don't actually care, which is very, very, very clear from what happened with, or the absence of anything happening with Mel Gibson. The backlash is focused on people like Melissa Barrera and Susan Sarandon for a reason. It's because what they're saying makes the people in power uncomfortable, because in the United States, the richest of the rich, the people who have political power, they benefit from Israel's assault on Palestine. They treat the whole region of West Asia as their own personal bank to profit from. So, of course, that is what's getting backlash specifically. So, yeah, that I think that exhausts what I had to say about the situation. I am angry as hell, and I know I'm not the only one. A lot of people have been expressing their anger over this. Unfortunately, I don't know much of what we can do about it. With the Susan Sarandon thing, I don't think there is really much of anything. With the Melissa Barrera situation, Jenna Ortega also dropped out of Scream, and she has been fairly vocal in the past, not in the current situation, but till like a year ago or some so, about the Israel Palestine conflict, to put it in soft terms. Um, and the company is trying to paint this picture of scheduling conflicts, because of which she's quitting, because she has to do Wednesday season 2. And so the company wants to film Scream 7 at the same time. But, that's bullshit. They don't even have a script for Scream 7 yet. They don't have a plan. They don't know uh, what they're going to be doing. They're still approaching actors and talking to them. It's all up in the air. So clearly, they do not currently have a schedule that can conflict with the schedule for Wednesday season 2. They could have easily decided their schedule around Jenna Ortega's uh, timetable. Whenever she gets done with Wednesday season 2, she starts shooting Scream 7. So I think a lot of people can see what's probably really happened, which is Jenna Ortega saw what the company did with Melissa Barrera, and she said, I'm out. So, in the midst of all that, what uh, a lot of us have been trying to do online is to get the hashtag boycott Scream 7 trending. Hopefully, the message gets out, and whenever Scream 7 comes out, without Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega, uh, it is a flop, and the company sees that. I keep saying the company because I cannot for the life of me remember the name of what company it was. New Regency, I think, something like that. I don't remember. One of these studios that's not one of like the big five studios, but like a mid to large movie studio that produces the Scream films. So, so they get the message that uh, Islamophobia and their support of genocide is not going to be as profitable for them as they thought it would. So let's boycott Scream 7. Now, that actually, interestingly, segues into the final segment of this video, which is what I've been watching lately, because I decided that, uh, or rather, instead of deciding, I should say, I just got really interested in watching the Scream movies in the midst of all this happening. I figured that, as much as I want to boycott Scream 7, I am now curious to watch Melissa Barrera's work in Scream 5 and 6. And thing is, as much of a film buff as I am, there are many gaps, many holes in my film knowledge, and one of the biggest has always been slashers. I had basically never seen slasher movie in my life, maybe one or two. I can't remember. Until a couple of months ago when I watched Psycho. And now, in these last couple of weeks, what I have been doing is catching up with some other major slasher films. In leading up to ultimately, I will watch Scream 5 and 6. So I just thought that in this video, I'll talk briefly about what I thought of them. So, starting with Psycho, I thought that was a really good, well made movie. Obviously, the twist in the middle is iconic. It The way the movie spends so much time getting you invested in certain characters, making you think it's going to be one kind of story, and then it turns out to be a completely different story. And then the film just creates multiple of the tropes that would be, go on to define slashers. It's really innovative and really interesting, and I love it. Anthony Perkins' performance as Norman Bates is iconic for a reason. He is a legend and one of the best slashers in film history, I'm sure, despite the fact that I've still only seen like 4 or 5 slashers. Uh, Anyway, the one problem I have with the movie, one major problem is the one that pretty much everyone does. So there's no point really spending much time on it. But yeah, that ending with the psychiatrist explaining everything, that was bad. That was so bad. So anyway, moving forward from that, the next one I caught up with was Toby Hooper's 1974, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Which, holy crap, I had no idea how much I was going to love it. So, spoiler alert, I mean, not for the movie, but for this discussion that I'm having right now with you. Among all the slashers I watched, this is my favorite. So far it is my favorite, and it's in fact, I think now one of my top 5 favorite horror movies ever, slasher or otherwise. It is such an engrossing, maddening, disturbing, distressing film. It makes you feel like you are boiling up in the searing heat. It makes you feel like you're in a grimy environment, like the characters. Uh, the screaming. A lot of slasher movies rely on the scream queen screaming or just women in general screaming a lot, but usually it's in short bursts because it's supposed to feel fun, because the idea is that male audiences enjoy watching women scream. But in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it is extended to an uncomfortable degree. You have like the scream queen, Madeline Burns, screaming almost continuously, almost nonstop for like half an hour or something. And it's supposed to make you feel like complete shit. And uh, it is such an innovative movie. The cinematography and the editing are genius level. The way it puts you in the shoes of the characters by making you feel like you are experiencing the same kind of unwelcome environment that they are is great. The way it did like social horror, the kind of social horror that's popular now, it did that way before it became common and had themes related to animal rights and vegetarianism in its story. That's pretty freaking impressive. And just, you know, the story is a good story, not in the traditional sense of characters with depth that you get invested in. No, the film doesn't do that. The characters are mostly hollow shells with like one or two defining traits, more in the sense that it uh, it just makes you feel for the plight of the group as a whole, and it makes you feel things for Leatherface, the slasher of the movie, despite never really getting to know who he is. Just this feeling that he is having such a shitty day. I mean, we know he's horrible, we hate him, but we still feel his frustration at the kind of shitty day he's having because of another great performance. And it's just a movie packed with one brilliant scene after another. The dinner table scene is iconic for a reason, and then at the end, I'm that's not me saying what happens at the end. I won't tell you, but in case you haven't seen it, because you absolutely must. But it ends with these two shots which are intercut with each other, and you can pick either one of those shots and call it one of the greatest shots, one of the greatest ending shots for a movie ever. Both of them individually are so impactful, and cut with each other, they just enhance. Each shot enhances the force of the other by a lot. I love this movie. It also is the slasher that convinced me even more than Psycho that I am not really interested in slasher sequels, generally speaking. Scream is an exception, but we'll come to that. With most slasher series, I feel like the first movie, the which is usually the strongest movie, part of its strength derives from the way it ends, and the way the Texas Chainsaw Massacre ended is so perfect that any continuation of the story of Leatherface and his family can only dilute the impact of this ending. That may not be true. I haven't actually seen the sequels, and for all I know, uh, it might not end up diluting it. But that's just the sense I was left with after this movie. I am still curious to check out part two, because Toby Hooper made it like apparently more of a horror comedy thing that was very divisive, and I'm curious to see what kind of crazy experimentation he came up with for that. And four also sounds like a weird trip. Like, I know it's almost universally hated, but has this like small cult following thingy, and it everything about four Texas Chainsaw 4 just sounds wild. And the Texas Chainsaw remakes, 2000s remake is also like considered to be one of the least bad 2000s era horror remakes. So, I might check that out. But for the most part, I'm not really interested in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre as a franchise. I'm much more interested in it as a single movie with one contained, complete story. So after that, the next one I picked up was John Carpenter's Halloween, and gotta say, I was a little bit disappointed. It's a good movie. I do think a lot of elements of its technique, of how it's shot, of some of the frames it creates, the score, those things should be admired, but it didn't ultimately end up being anywhere near as effective for me as uh, its reputation might suggest it should be. Uh, Michael Myers did not feel like a very threatening villain to me. I guess a lot of his threat got diluted by the fact that he was presented as such a supernatural, unkillable force. Uh, this person whose motivation is also like pure evil instead of anything human. So there's this disconnect between the crimes that are happening and how I'm feeling about them versus the criminal who's actually doing them, because as is well known, Halloween started that trope in slasher films of uh, if you have sex, you die. And Michael Myers, whether it's his elder sister at the starting of the movie or characters that he then goes after later, uh, keeps going after girls are who could be seen as like promiscuous, or who would have been slut shamed at the time, or today even they would be slut shamed for their actions because they dared to have teenage sex, unmarried sex, or whatever it is. And when a man goes around doing that, and the only thing that's able to stop him is a woman who is not having sex, who is quote unquote a virgin, as we usually say with slasher movies, uh, that can end up being very interesting dive into the kind of terror that the patriarchy or that misogynistic men can induce in women. And that could have been the horror of Halloween, the way, let's say, it was in part the horror of The Shining, because the way Jack Torrance terrorizes his wife, Shelley Duvall's character, I'm forgetting her name, that was very much rooted in the way in the real world abusive husbands torment their wives. Everything about the tiniest details of their interactions felt real in that sense, despite the fact that Jack Torrance also had a supernatural, eternal, unkillable connection in that movie. So, that can be done. Alternatively, you can just make your threat a completely supernatural entity, and then the killings are just completely random. People are dying, and the fear is how to not die. That's the scare factor. But Halloween tried to have it both ways. It tried to insert a sort of like Catholic morality, which John Carpenter's co-writer, I'm forgetting her name right now, she brought to the movie. And so the identities of who got killed and who survived got influenced by that moralizing, but without that ever seeping into really the characterization of the killer, because the killer is just supposed to be pure supernatural evil without any of those human instincts that would make him selective in the way he was. And yeah, all of those things contributed, along with just general story decisions that I thought weakened the film quite a bit. Uh, some kind of inconsistencies in rules, and I know that's a common thing for slashers. It's okay to be inconsistent with your rules sometimes in favor of having a cool kill. But some of the ways it happened in Halloween really took me out of some scenes and made them not feel as scary. Just things that we saw, like supernatural things that we saw Michael Myers can do in one scene, but then in a later scene, uh, we see him not being able to do that. We see him being limited by regular human limitations, and it's weird. It's unconvincing. So yeah, I didn't end up loving Halloween. I still liked it. I know I've just talked a lot of shit about it. I still think that there were enough good things. Some of the supporting performances were good, even though I didn't end up liking the lead performance. And that's not me saying she's a bad actress. Jamie Lee Curtis uh, is currently quite a good actress. She was really good in Knives Out. She was really good in Everything Everywhere All at Once. But yeah, it does seem like at the start of her career, maybe she was not that good of an actress. I don't know. At least in Halloween, I don't think she was. She did not give uh, a very compelling lead performance, in my opinion. And yeah, that would have ordinarily, I guess, brought me to Friday the 13th, but I ended up skipping that franchise and skipping Jason Voorhees because it's like I don't want to I don't want to watch multiple movies in that franchise, and if I'm just picking one, I want to watch one which has Jason Voorhees, but I know the first one does not have Jason Voorhees. So the whole thing seems like a mess and seems like too much effort. And uh, yeah, it felt like, you know, if I want to just watch the major classics, the staples of the genre, maybe I can skip it. But if you're watching this video and feeling offended, please tell me, if I watch one Friday the 13th film, which one should it be? Should I watch the second one or the third one or another one entirely? Let me know. Should I just watch Freddy versus Jason? Because I really like Freddy. Speaking of which, the movie I watched after Halloween was actually A Nightmare on Elm Street, my first Wes Craven movie ever, and God, I ended up really liking it. It's such an interesting story. I mean, first of all, I just like that it managed to avoid the kind of weird sexual politics that Halloween brought into slashers and then that slashers had picked up and ran with. Of course, in Nightmare on Elm Street, also, we start the movie with a girl having sex and dying, and then the final girl of the film doesn't never ends up having sex throughout the movie. So you could interpret it in that way, but I think the movie was pretty clear that the two things were not really connected. The things that the characters were facing, that the final girl was facing, the things that made you a better or worse survivor against Freddy Krueger had nothing to do with how sexual a person you were. It had to do with your power over your own dreams, your power over your own fears, your relationships with the people around you. And speaking of the latter, the movie was really terrifying because, I mean, of course, Freddy Krueger himself is a really scary slasher. Uh, he can take the safest part of your day, sleep, and turn it into something that you're just running away from, that you are not looking forward to. And like personally, to me, I think thing I look forward to the most every day is sleep. I love sleeping. And if someone took that away from me, if I couldn't look forward to sleeping, if I was dreading sleep, I would just want them to die the most horrible death, probably. I don't know. Uh, but yeah, Freddy Krueger is terrifying. But the reason this movie is so terrifying is because the terror goes far beyond him. In fact, he's not nearly the scariest thing in the movie. Scarier than him is the fact that the cops are so uninterested in helping the citizenry, which, I mean, that's real, right? That reflects our world pretty well. Uh, Scarier is that you have parents who are so obsessively concerned with raising you in the specific way that they think you should be raised, and so uh, determined not to listen to you, their child, that they will control you to the point of abusing you, just so they don't have to ever admit that they might have been wrong and you might have been on to something. So they will like literally close their eyes in the face of definitive proof just so they don't have to admit that maybe their child should have been able to make one self-determining choice. So, that kind of parenting, that's terrifying. Being separated from your support system, from your actual friends, and both your parents and the police not letting you interact with the people who actually care about you, your friends who actually might want to help you or whom you might be able to help. That kind of isolation is terrifying. Uh, the protagonist, the final girl, she has a boyfriend played appropriately by Johnny Depp, who is a complete asshole and doesn't care about her really, at least nowhere near as much as he pretends to, and is just a complete shithead who is very self-absorbed. And yeah, that kind of being in that kind of a relationship can then make everything worse because it adds to the isolation, it adds to the feeling that you have no one to rely on but yourself. And that is ultimately the feeling that A Nightmare on Elm Street thrives on. Isolating the protagonist, making her feel like the only way to fight Freddy Krueger is to fight alone and to just equip herself with everything. Even asking for help near the end while being almost sure that that help is not going to come because the people she's asking can't really do much. And yeah, that just leads to one of the most emotionally raw endings to a horror movie that I've ever seen. I will say that there is one small decision in the ending to A Nightmare on Elm Street that I do not like, and if anyone wants to discuss spoilers, I'm happy to. I will talk about what it was, but that decision does not really completely ruin the ending or anything. It's fine. But yeah, for the most part, I love the ending. And like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, this is another ending that made me really feel like I do not want to watch another Nightmare on Elm Street movie. I might still end up watching the third one because I love the protagonist, the final girl of this movie so much, and we get to see her story continued in part three. The one movie I do really want to watch is not a sequel to Nightmare, and it's Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which is like a meta movie about the making of these nightmare films, or not the making of, but the makers of, and what their lives are like, and what how making these movies affects these fictionalized uh, actors and directors and all those people. Uh, that sounds really cool and fun uh, in a really interesting way. So I will probably end up watching that. But the slasher I did actually move on to from A Nightmare on Elm Street was a different meta slasher movie that was also made by Wes Craven just 2 years after he made Wes Craven's New Nightmare. And that is, of course, the iconic Scream. I really liked Scream. I had a blast with it. It's such a fun movie. It's so well paced. It moves like honestly it moves like no other slasher moves. My favorite is still the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but that's not a movie that always is moving because that's not the point. There that movie has phases where it's just completely running through things that you thought it might take its time with because it wants to make you feel like, oh shit, everything's happening too fast, I can't handle it. And then there are other times where it will just stick with one emotion for so long that you'll feel like you need to escape this. So that's a movie that's deliberately unpleasant. Scream, on the other hand, is just it's a party. I get why it was such a big tradition in the late 90s and early 2000s for teenagers to sit in front of the TV, come together and watch Scream. In fact, even today, I feel like I would love to have friends over at my house and watch Scream with them. I think that would be really fun because it just is a really great blend of a fun slasher that works as a good horror movie. It has scenes that actually manage to keep you tense and uh, edge of your on the edge of your seat, while also having really great comedic scenes and making fun of both slasher tropes and fans of slasher movies uh, in just a really nice, good natured way. But beyond that, the thing that I feel makes Scream more than just a horror spoof movie uh, that makes it special, really special, is the way it subverts the kind of Halloween-esque sexual politics that I mentioned earlier. The kind of the horror movie trope of uh, sort of slut shaming anyone who, especially women who decide to have sex, uh, because unlike some other, let's say, slasher movies that might just subvert the trope by doing the opposite of the trope. Like Scream could have done that by just having, okay, here's a character, she has sex, but she doesn't die. You could do that, but instead, the movie actually really digs into it. It digs into this protagonist's own relationship with sex, with uh, how she feels pressured around her. She feels like maybe she shouldn't have sex, but another force feels like makes her feel like no, it would be wrong for her to not have sex, and she really should have sex, and she really has to struggle with letting herself and her own feelings decide when she has sex or not, as opposed to all these external voices that are in her head. Plus, she also has to deal with her memory of her mom. So, a year before the movie starts, the protagonist, Sydney Prescott, loses her mother. And Nev Campbell is amazing in this movie, by the way. I can't believe the Scream uh, producers decided not to pay her enough to come back for Scream 6. Why would you lose out on such a great actress? But anyway, so her character, Sydney, she has to deal with her complicated feelings about her mother and uh, how what her mother's reputation was regarding being a sexually active person, a sexually active woman specifically. And the way the movie deals with it is just so deftly handled. It's so beautiful, and it's for the most part such a clear message, and I love it. Sometimes it really is a good thing for a movie to have a clear message instead of leaving it up for the audience. That said, in that same vein, I will say that my one issue with how that was handled was that the whole arc of Sydney's feelings about her mother was not really given a solid resolution at the end. Uh, I think after everything happened and uh, everyone knew what the truth of every situation is, in the calm phase of the movie after the stressful phase is over, there should have really been a scene where she comes to terms with her memory of her mom. I think that would have made the themes of the movie sing better. And just on an emotional level, I think it would have made for a stronger ending. But yeah, that one quibble aside, I think Scream was really fun. I then watched Scream 2, which is a good, fun sequel. Is not really going for anything as deep as the original Scream, so I didn't end up loving it as much. But I had a good time. I enjoyed it. It poked fun at sequels in a fun way. Uh, it was another good whodunit. I mean, the first one is a stronger whodunit because uh, while it's like I wasn't able to figure out the identities of the of Ghostface, the identity of Ghostface. At the end, when I did find out, it did feel like, oh right, the clues were there, and if someone really took their time with the clues, they could piece things together. And that's the kind of thing the best whodunits do, where they make you feel like, okay, you were behind the movie, but you were only a step behind the movie, and or the puzzle that you weren't able to solve was solvable. Whereas with two, I wasn't able to figure out the solution. I was able to figure out a part of the solution, but I got so confident about that part that I completely missed everything else that was really going on as well. So I wasn't able to piece those things together, but I did not get that kind of satisfying feeling when the reveal came that, if I'd just been smarter, if I'd just been cleverer, I could have pieced it together. No, a lot of it felt like it couldn't really have been pieced together anyway. So that kind of a feeling makes me feel like it's a somewhat weaker reveal. Uh, so the second one doesn't work quite as well as a whodunit as the first one. It doesn't work quite as well in terms of its explorations of horror movie related themes as the first one, but uh, it's a good sequel. It does not sacrifice character arcs in favor of just being like a shallow slasher with a lot of movie references dropped in, and none of that stuff. I mean, of course, it does those things as well, but it does actually care about its characters. It continues character arcs from the first movie. It lets Courtney Cox continue to play an asshole as she did in the first movie, which is just such a delight to watch. What a good actress. She could play someone as sweet as Monica and such a jerk as Gail Weathers. Amazing. She's great. Um, so yeah, Scream 2 is a good worthy sequel, and if you enjoy Scream, you should watch it. Uh, I will continue on with Scream 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. But in parallel, I've also started watching the Scream TV show. Now, I had heard it starts rough, but I'm watching it anyway because I've heard it gets much better and that season two is really strong before it gets shitty again. So I don't think I'll end up watching season three, but I will watch the first two seasons. But despite having heard about how rough it starts, I had no idea just how rough it starts. I've watched two episodes now, and the beginning of episode two, the opening scene of episode two, made me want to just shut my laptop down, just stop watching the show. I mean, I was watching it on a TV, but it was connected to the laptop. So yeah, I just wanted to close it and give up on the series completely because it was such an ugly, terrible way to handle the stories, the teenage stories that this show was handling, and just the worst impulses that horror filmmakers have seem to come out to play here. And it really was not in the spirit that Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson established for the Scream series. And yeah, I hate it, but I will keep watching because, of course, the same thing that I just said. I've heard it gets better, and because the lead actress is Ella Fitzgerald, who we all just saw and completely fell in love with in The Fall of the House of Usher, where she played young Madeline Usher, possibly the best character in the show, definitely top three, and definitely a top three performance in the show when we're just specifically talking about Ella Fitzgerald's part in that character. She was so good, and she is like one of the biggest reasons I'm continuing to watch Scream. So yeah, next time I upload a video, next time we talk, I will have seen more of that show and I will share my thoughts about whether it actually gets better or not. Uh, See you then. I think that's it for today. That is all I had to say. And thanks for watching or listening. Good night. Bye.